G'day guys. Well, I was baking in the sun today, enjoying the beautiful weather that we've been having down here, 30 odd. So it's been nice in Tasmania for a while, but when you come out of winter and your skin's not used to like extreme UV 12, yes, yeah. Anyway, maybe I should have consumed a bit more retinol, but anyway, shit happens. Pinky Harry. Yes, Pinky Harry. Anyway, the purpose of this was to touch on some interesting stuff that I've been thinking about. I have conversations with sometimes people, why do some people move away from the standard diet? Why do they end up gravitating towards, other lifestyle options? Obviously, I mean, some people are born into them, like in southern India, you've got a strong vegetarian culture there. The same thing goes for Loma Linda type, and those sort of regions, and a number of other regions around the world that have, different dietary practices for a very long time. The majority of people around the world usually will gravitate towards a standard diet of one sort or another, whether it's a standard regional, it'll be a mixed macro type diet. It can vary to the degree of processed food. Obviously, if you go to places like the UK, the US, Canada, even Mexico nowadays, it wasn't as bad in the past, but it's starting to become worse. Australasia, those sort of regions where, the junk food option is more prevalent, but in many other places also, to a large extent, there's some level of mixed macro diets of varying types or whatever. So what forces a small part of the population to basically fall into, either gravitate towards a carnivore diet or a low carb diet, or basically, a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, or stuff like that? I've been thinking about it, and the sort of conclusion that I've come up with from now dealing with a number of people's ailments, the sort of experience that I've actually realized is that a certain proportion of the population are going to be more susceptible than others. Like some people, probably about 2/3 of the population probably don't overdo it and probably can tolerate a slight higher threshold of these sort of mixed diets. Obviously, if somebody's a tradie, outdoors working or working in a factory or working on the land, they will tolerate it much better because they're physically active, they're depleting glycogen, they're dealing with, excess. People that are office type workers are going to have more of these problems. People that are more sedentary in their lifestyle are going to be more engaging the Randall cycle at a higher gradient. And so they're going to have more inflammation and things like that. Now, how the body deals with that inflammation is going to vary from person to person, and it'll be, for a number of reasons, both the degree of inflammation being induced with certain things, the degree of physical activity, and also what they're actually, have inherited in terms of genetic predispositions. It's a bit like, the calcium issue. When the carnivores come to me and they said, I've been doing carnivore now for a number of months and I'm getting these heart palpitations and all that. I go, you're like me. You're one of those 24% of people that pretty much needs more calcium because your ancestors were pastoral. They consumed more calcium, and you actually, your ancestral genes were down-regulated in terms of absorbing calcium because the body was getting more than enough, let's say quite a bit more than was required, and so had to basically, slow that up. But then you move into a modern era where you're not doing a lot of calcium-rich foods like sardines or dairy, and immediately you're either doing a mixed diet, but you're actually holding up insulin to much higher levels, and so you're getting certain things. And even people that are on mixed diets will get some of these things, and they sort of consider them, I'll take a medication, and that they may not realize they have these genetics, or their doctors probably wouldn't, which should actually know this. And if they're not getting enough calcium in their diet, obviously it's going to have that effect on the causing some of these issues of arrhythmias and heart palpitations and stuff like that. And I usually say to carnivores, if you have this, you don't need a genetic test. You don't need to do a month or a couple of weeks, steak only. And if it actually, you get any issues emerging, and then you put the dairy in and you're getting slightly more calcium and it gets resolved, you go, yep, that's my problem. I'm one of those 24%. Obviously, if we hadn't gone down the industrial or the agricultural revolution, people in Europe and different parts of Asia and the Americas and some parts of Africa as well, if we hadn't gone down that route, we would have not changed and introduced a number of other foods into which we can tolerate, or our bodies down-regulate certain pathways or alter certain pathways, because in order to be able to deal with that problem, a bit like the Han Chinese, they can endogenously produce high levels of choline, which exports fat out of the liver and also is quite good for neurotransmitters and many other things. They tend to have less of those problems. So that's a genetic alteration, which means that they don't need as much. But even if they get more, it's not a problem, but they don't need as much. So certain conditions that would be caused by choline deficiency doesn't happen in them, because they had a very restricted diet for a number of generations by one of their vegetarian leaders that imposed that, and those who survived got this mutation. And so we have a number of these mutations, the Irish with their retinol mutation and a number of others that are around, and or MTHFR issues, like I've got MTHFR as well. That's also a prevalent thing, anywhere. It can vary the amount of people that have it, from a quarter up or down from that level of the population. And there again, that can be an issue and all that. And you're going, why isn't my pure meat carnivore diet not working exactly? Well, maybe because you've got certain genetics that your ancestors picked up in the last 10,000 years, and that's your problem. And so you can't do a pure meat-only diet, carnivore. You need to take into consideration some of these other elements. You may need slightly more retinol, which means that you may need to eat certain types of foods, but not everyone has to. 70 odd +%, the majority of humanity doesn't have to. They can do a steak only, not an issue. People ask me about, but just does primarily beef. Well, Pim doesn't. She'll include more other foods in there. I do as well. And people say, well, is this going to cause problems to Bart? Not really. No, it shouldn't, unless he's got certain genetics that he's unaware of. But generally speaking, he would have got certain symptoms. He would have realized, there's an issue here. I need to find out what it is and play around with some other foods to see whether, since he hasn't had any of that symptomatology, probably is not a problem for him. Now, do I think that beef only is the way to go? Well, in the end, when you take protein from any animal, gets into your stomach, it gets broken down to simple amino acids and gets denatured. At the end of the day, you're not actually taking in foreign proteins from the animal. You're taking in amino acids and fatty acids. That's what you're taking in. So no, it's not a damn issue whatsoever what the source is, whatever you like. I don't like beef, so I prefer lamb and pork. So that's me. And there are many populations. My great-grandfather lived on goat, primarily goat meat, and some pork and dairy, and lived to 107. So I don't see what the source of animal protein is, as long as it's animal-based protein, and you've got an ability to deal with dairy-based products because of your genetics, and then it's a non-issue there as well. But a lot of people, they get too wound up about all that, and some people say, "Oh, you've got to have ruminant animals." Really? Don't think so. I mean, tell me which any animal being ancestral on this planet that I know of that we're consuming, they're all domesticated. I mean, the auroch is the original, animal, and the bison in the Americas. And before that, it was the mammoth. I don't see any mammoths running around. Protein is protein. Now, all proteins from different animals are going to have slightly different compositions and all that in terms of amino acids or fatty acids and all that, but it's not going to be massive. If you look at most animals, they've got minor differences in fatty acid profile. Most of them have a certain amount of MUFAs, saturated fats, and a certain small amount of PUFAs of varying degrees. Where there is probably there can be a slight difference, and even there's not a big difference, is in some of the micronutrients. It can be slightly different. Like, I'll give you an example. Pork is much higher in thiamine and niacin. Now, if you're eating a mixed diet and you're having pork like the Chinese do and a number of the Asians do, Northeast Asians, like the Okinawans and people like that, then that can be a bit of an advantage, because getting that extra thiamine and that extra niacin can actually help you with carbohydrate metabolism. Okay, so there can be a benefit in that, eating that type of animal product, but it's not necessary, on a carnivore diet. At the end of the day, all protein, all fatty acids end up as aminos and fat as fatty acids. And that's what you absorb, So the majority of, in the middle part of your small intestine is where the majority of, amino acids are drawn in. And in the bottom part is the majority of fatty acids that are drawn in, and fat-soluble vitamins and stuff like that. So I think we need to get out of our head some of this sort of stuff. Everybody's sort of, oh, you've got to be beef only, or this or that. Just, if you don't like beef, or you like lamb more, you like pork more, or you like basically goat more. My father loves goat. I don't mind it, but I'm not a big goat eater, but he loves it. If I was to give him goat or lamb, he'd eat the goat. So, and even the Maasai, remember the video that I did on Maasai? They primarily eat goat meat, like my grandfather would have eaten, primarily goat. Why? Because it's a hardy animal. You can be in a semi-arid environment and have goats. They can survive. They're hardy creatures. You can put them on the edge of a cliff and they'll survive. Those little buggers will survive anywhere, and they'll mate like goats. Yes, they're very, let's say, energetic in those areas. So in that department, so you can grow a big herd very fast. Anyway. But before I get too humorous, and they keep their cattle for dairy, because it's a valuable animal. So they don't consume a lot of, for special occasions they consume the ruminant animal, but the majority of times they will consume a small ruminant animal like the goat. So that's their key go-to ruminant animal, rather than the big. We've got this fixation with cows in the carnivore community, which is weird, but anyway, it's really a North American thing. Sort of the modern day carnivore sort of diet sort of really emerged in North America, and sort of is very beef centric. And it's just, but even if you go 100 years back, pork was more important. If you go to, and Cincinnati used to be Porkopolis, where the majority of lard, the top fat that was used up until the early part of the 20th century was lard. And pork was one of the main primary foods that a majority of people, Europe, Asia, and unless the Muslim countries where they would consume other animals like goats and sheep and stuff like that. But these were very, it was a very important, source of fat and a very important source, and people very healthy in those times. So far healthier than they are today. So I don't think, pork's an issue whatsoever. And I've done plenty of videos on PUFA. I've got a whole playlist with PUFA covering every single aspect, and there is a non-issue there. Obviously, some people have preferences, and I go, fine. I mean, you don't need a higher thiamine. You don't need higher, because you need half the enzymatic machinery to basically metabolize protein and fat. You need double the amount when you're processing carbohydrates. So your thiamine requirements go up if you're eating more carbs. Fair enough, But the majority of people in the carnivore community are not going to be consuming that sort of contraindicated food. So it's a non-issue. So at the end of the day, eat the foods that you enjoy, and don't get too wound up. Even the Inuit, I mean, they consume seals, caribou, and fish. Large parts of their diet is actually made up of fish. In some cases, up to 40%. So they have a very high fish diet, a bit like the Japanese, So it's just that they are more carnivorous compared to the Japanese, but they have a high fish diet as well. So they have a high taurine intake as well, which a lot of people don't realize about when you take a look amongst the Inuit, statistics, they do consume quite a lot of, and fish is quite popular amongst the Inuit. It's an easy to go fish. You just dig a hole and fish. It's an easy thing to get. It's easier to get than compared. Now, many people say, well, like that Varus guys, they eat only raw. No, they don't. What a load of garbage. I've never heard the most ridiculous nonsense in my life. What do you think they actually find along the coastal areas? That's why they make their igloos close to the coastal areas. It's not only to access food in the coastal areas, but also there's a lot of coming from the Siberia area, which is tundra. There's a lot of, like down the rivers, you'll get a lot of logs and trees and stuff like that. That comes out, that actually ends up on these coastal areas. You know what? They collect all that and they use it as firewood in their igloos, So it's just nonsense. And you know what they cook with? Their primary cooking oil? Guess what it is? Seal fat. Seal fat is their primary. And, when we talk about seal fat, you're talking about a fat that is also high in vitamin D that most people aren't aware of, and a number of other micronutrients as well. So it's a great source of vitamin D, actually. And so they actually have that, and they cook with it. And that's what they cook their fish in. They have raw foods as well. Yep, obviously, because to have enough fishing and to have enough cooking oil and stuff like that is a problem. To have enough, wood for that purpose and all that, So when they've slaughtered an animal, they will actually eat all the fluids. That's extra taurine. They'll also basically, get electrolytes and all sorts of things from that, and then they'll take that back and cook it, or they'll put it under snow and allow it to ferment. So a bit like kefir and stuff like that. It's a different, but if you go to the northern parts, Scandinavia and all that, Iceland, they've got shitloads of dishes. People from those regions have got shitloads of dishes of basically fermented fish, fermented meats, and all sorts of things. It's traditional what they did. Inuit do the same thing. Humans have been doing some sort of fermented foods for a very long time. That's normal. Remember, we're scavenger carnivores. That's why we've got a very low pH. We can tolerate these. It's only when we're on inappropriate diets that we derange our bodies And then we can't cope with it. We have to go steak only, clear everything out, and then allow our, bodies to heal themselves. And once they've healed themselves from all the seed oils, pumping in seed oils, pumping in refined sugars, and a whole lot of other, inappropriate things, then our body recovers. And then we can cope with, dairy. We can cope with far more, because then we have proper stomach acid. Many people don't have proper stomach acid. I mean, forget about fermented foods. It would cause them a lot of problems. They may have gut permeability. The last thing you want is to add more, oil to the fire that's in their gut, that inflammation. So you need to heal before you can start adding some of these foods in. There's nothing wrong with these foods. I mean, people, some people, because of historical reasons, we haven't grown up with them, especially the last couple of generations. We've been disconnected from our traditional food supply, and we view these foods as yucky. And so we don't go for them. But it doesn't mean, that can be a good source of probiotics and stuff like that. Kefir and stuff like that can really help and heal, especially if you've got derangements. Because none of us are ancestral. We know that. Let's not bullshit to each other. We know none of us are ancestral. Now, people can use the cheese option. That's a good option as well. You're going to get lactobacillus, which is really important, those sort of strains, and they can help regulate some of the other stuff in the gut, together with taurine that comes from the animal foods. You can still do fine. I'm not knocking that, the steak-only option. But I'm saying that some people need a bit more, and some people have genetics that definitely require certain other, permutations in terms of the stuff that they put in themselves. And others are preferences, cultural preferences, or just things that, at the end of the day, all proteins end up as amino acids, and all fats end up as fatty acids. Once they're actually, the stomach's dealt with them, that's what they end up. And they get absorbed at the rate that the body requires. So, I mean, yeah, let's get over a lot of this sort of tribalism, steak only, raw only, cooked only, sort of that we have. Yes, you've got preferences. That's fine. I've got no problems with people having preferences. But let's just stop this nonsense that people say, this is more. Because they say, oh, it denatures if you cook it. Well, what the hell do you think your stomach acid does? It denatures proteins. It breaks them down to simple amino acids and fatty acids. And if you've got intracellular, let's say some of those fats in cooking, and we know, I've done the videos, even for the PUFA, after 3 hours of cooking, people just need to go and look at my playlist on PUFA. Even 3 hours of cooking, you get trace amounts. If you've got upregulated intracellular antioxidant systems, you know what? It's a non-issue, a complete non-issue. The genus Homo species of all these, from way back from Homo erectus or whatever, for 1.5 million years, we've been consuming cooked meat. Get the hell over it, So it's just ridiculous. Varys and people like that make a big thing. Oh, you've got to be Osverage. If you cook your meat, you're a slave. So I didn't think there was any, back then there was only tribal societies. There was no slave owning societies back when the Homo erectus were around. Somebody forgot to send them the memo. Those naughty Homo erectus, cooking their food. What were they thinking? God, how ridiculous. Yes, it's more, yes, the sun gazer, lunatic. Luckily, he's eating, raw animal foods and getting a bit more taurine, which is protecting his eyes, because one of the highest concentrations of taurine is in your eyes out of all the parts of your body in terms of weight percentage, So he's very lucky that he's getting a bit more than some of the people that are cooking it. But yeah, it's just the lunacy that's out there. an ex-crazed, because he was a crazy vegan, then he became a crazy carnivore. So it doesn't surprise me. He was always crazy. So yes, I don't know why people bother with him and why they find him popular. Maybe they, a bit like Vegetable Police and people like that. People just like the drama, fair enough, God, if you really want drama, just watch an action movie. I mean, God almighty, do you have to listen to the deranged ideas of certain people for drama? God, yes. Don't people get bored with all these drama queens that are around? I do. Yeah, so really, guys, I mean, we need to keep this in mind. A carnivore diet should be an animal-based diet, an animal-centric diet. That's what it should be. And we shouldn't be basically attacking each other on our food preferences. Cooked, slightly raw, I mean, Bart loves his stuff cooked, fair enough. Pim likes a bit of raw stuff, so do I. So Bart loves beef. I don't. I just really don't enjoy it. I mean, beef tartare, yeah, I'll have a bit of that, but I really love lamb. Lamb is just beautiful, the flavor, or pork. I mean, it's just my preference in that regard. I like squid, or calamari squid in particular. I love it. So, and I cook it. I'll cook strips of it in like either the bacon grease or lard. Actually, Hello Kitty gave me some lard, so I actually cooked the squid rings in lard. Really nice and crispy. Oh, magic. So I've still got some. I should try to get some cooked this weekend, and probably take a bit around down to the old man as well. He loves that sort of stuff as well. I mean, yeah, guys, and it's a very high source of cholesterol, much higher than ruminant animals. So if you're healing and you need high cholesterol foods like eggs, squid are really good options to include in a diet because they're very high in cholesterol. And when you're healing your body, you need far more cholesterol. What do you think your LDL goes down when you actually have a virus attack or you have some major injury? It doesn't go down accidentally. It's because of blood. You need cholesterol to heal. It's an important component of healing. So, obviously the crackpots see an association, but they're crackpots. People that understand and and have researched it know quite clearly that cholesterol is extremely important for cell membranes and for a whole lot of other biological processes in the body, and even the hormonal system and stuff like that. So, I mean, anybody that wants to lower it, is just going to harm themselves long term. And that's my personal opinion. That's not medical advice or whatever, but I still believe that is the case, why people struggle with healing because they're not getting enough cholesterol in their diet, is their biggest problem. So these are the things we need to realize. We need to stop demonizing foods, and we need to enjoy the animal foods that we consume. Because even in our community, we have a bit of demonization of piggy. That really annoys me because I love piggy. And when I hear people poo-pooing piggy, I want to slap them. Anyway, that's me externalizing my frustration with those people. I'll say no more. You know what I mean? So I'd like to basically take a pork chop at them. I like seafood as well. I like dairy. Obviously, some people can't tolerate it. They don't have the genetics for it. That's fine. You don't need to do it. So it's just the way it is. Some people need to do it, need to do dairy, need to do calcium-rich foods for the simple reason that we've got certain genetic requirements. So you shouldn't poo-poo us because we do it, because we've got genetic requirements. you should be understanding. And I would say that more people that end up leaving the standard diet tend to have a lot of these genetic predispositions, whether it's choline or whether it's, you know, the standard MTHFR sort of stuff, or whether it's calcium related or many other things, or retinol or whatever. They tend to have these things. And on a standard diet, they tend to suffer more than the average person. And so compared to the average person that will put up with some small discomfort, when you've got a lot of discomfort, that's when you start looking for other options. And I suspect from my own experience dealing with a lot of carnivores and other people, even people that have approached me who have been vegan or sort of switched to vegetarianism, can't find themselves to move beyond that point, I work out some options for them. At the end of the day, I run this channel to try and help people. I don't sit around just because I'm a carnivore, sitting around just hitting people over the head about their food preferences. I do think I will point out to them that I do think that part of their dietary approach is causing them their problems, but I will try and give them some solutions to remedy some of the more problematic things. Some people will do a vegetarian diet because they do have pastoral genes, and they can actually do like an animal-based vegetarian diet. I know it sounds crazy, which means seafood, dairy, and eggs. And they do fine, very comfortably on that. Some people say, well, you're not getting heme iron, because it's non-heme iron on those two. But you are getting on the crustaceans, and because that's what the other thing that I promote, crustaceans. I go, they are much higher in minerals. And so that's where you can get your minerals from a good animal source, and you'll get good levels of iron. Actually, some of the crustaceans even have higher levels of minerals than many of the ruminant animals. So these people can actually get really good levels of minerals from these crustaceans, having some of this sort of stuff once or twice, a couple of times a week. So there are always options for people. And I'm not going to poo-poo if somebody wants to do a carnivore, what I call a vegetarian carnivore diet. It's fine. If it works for you, I'm fine with that. I want you being healthier, rather than saying, no, that's not going to work for me, and walking away from it. I'll give you options. I'll get you as close to higher carnivory as possible without, stepping on your own beliefs in that regard. Even though I disagree with them, I'll help you out to be able to navigate that to some extent. And I've always had that approach, because where I will criticize people, I'll be quite strict about it. And if people come to me and actually start saying and poo-pooing the carnivore diet based on pseudoscience, I'll slap them down like Bart does. I will do the same thing. But if people come to me with a genuine thing saying, look, I know the science that you guys are promoting, I can't contradict it, I can't argue against it, but ethically, in my own soul, I don't want to do this sort of stuff, or I can't do this sort of stuff, or I find it difficult. I'll find a solution for them in that regard. But that's not a person that's saying you're wrong, saying, I know you're right, but I can't do it that way, and I need an option. And so I'm flexible in that regard. I'm not going to basically try and bash people over the head. I'll try and get them halfway there, rather than away from a very unhealthy, veganerized, nutrient deficient diet, or a SAD diet, or going back to a SAD diet, which has got a lot of problems, a lot of toxic seed oils, and a lot of issues that will create a lot of health problems for those people in the long run, and giving them a better option. Because I don't want people to do fake meats. Fake meats are full of toxic seed oils. That's the last thing we want people to be doing, So there's nothing wrong with working with people to find solutions to their dietary issues and to consider their genetics and stuff like that. I'm not going to sit around and take, the high moral ground or stuff like that. I will work with people, because at the end of the day, I want them to be healthier than what they currently are. You know, that's my sort of focus. But I will slap down anyone that comes to me and says that the N15 data, or, you know, that ignores the N15 data, you know, the Delta 13 data, which is quite emphatic. And now we've got also some of the zinc data as well. Not that we really need it, because with Delta 13, it pretty much is a slam dunk. I mean, there's no way that humans are eating grass, okay? There's no way that they're doing that. We don't see anywhere that happening. So they're not going to have high Delta 13. It's impossible. And unless they're actually eating grass, then they'll have very high, you know, N14 as well. So we know it's animals, ruminant animals that are eating grass. So they're concentrating, you know, these nitrogen isotopes and these carbon isotopes as well. So we know it's coming from C4 grass. You know, so that's a slam dunk. We don't even have to argue. Now, they're trying to make a whole lot of spurious because there's some bark-eating tree, but there's a ruminant in southern Africa that eats bark and has high in N15. Whoopee! It also has very low Delta 13. So it's a non-issue. We know it's not eating grass. It's eating something else. I wonder what it's eating. It's, you know, it's eating basic bark. And we found that out. So it's well known. So that's a non-issue. That was just the vagoonerized community and their vagoonerized academics have tried to make an issue of it to sort of throw doubt on the N15 data, to muddy the waters, as they always do, these clowns. That's what they do. So, you know, obviously some people in the carnivore community think, oh, let's go for the zinc option, showing high zinc, which means it can only come from animal sources. That's fine. That adds an additional layer of proof, but I didn't need it. That's just adding an additional layer of proof. I think the evidence is quite clear. The carvings on rocks, the carvings in caves are quite clear what we hunted and what we lust for, which is ruminant animals. Yeah, so that's just crap. And all the tools that we developed are all related to hunting. It's quite clear what we're interested in, and it wasn't you know, avocado on toast. It was, you know, a juicy steak. That's what we're interested in. Now, obviously, you know, all our ancestors also consumed some river fish or coastal fish to, you know, different degrees, but their primary was ruminant animals. But that doesn't mean that, you know, at the end of the day, if you're getting protein from animal sources, protein, it will be broken down to amino acids. That's what it will be broken down. Fatty acids to fatty acids, to fats to fatty acids. So let's just get over that. That's, our body does not utilize foreign proteins. We've got enzymes for that. Our enzymes take the amino acids and fatty acids and cholesterol and then builds new structure within our body, okay? And uses cofactors, mineral and vitamin cofactors, to run some of those catalytic processes in the body. That means the enzymatic processes that happen in our body. So, you know, at the fundamental level, it's aminos and fatty acids. And we need to get over this nonsense that this species or that animal or that one, because they're all domesticated and mammoths aren't around. Glyptodons, I think there was one that was a big fat, it looked like a Michael Eads talks about it, and it looked like a little mini miner. This big thing, and it moved very slowly, and our ancestors loved it as well. It was very fatty as an animal in the glacial periods. So, I mean, that got hunted as well, and there were a couple of other animals. You know, the aurochs also existed, but we have some hunting of them in some regions. More humans hunted them more than others. But remember, that's just in Northern Europe. The majority of humans lived in a whole lot of places around the world hunting different types of animals, and they thrived and did well. At the end of the day, what we need is high quality animal protein and fat from all sources of all animal sources. And the preferences that you have, that will be up to you. Obviously, the other point that I've tried to stress in this video is that there are genetics as well, because of the last, more or less, if we went anywhere between, we started including, some plants about approximately 10,000 years, but really it's probably about 5,500 years where we started with tillage and stuff like that. So 3,500 years tillage BC, which with currently it makes it about, around about 5,500 years all up. So that's the sort of extent we as a species were dealing with, we're dealing with agriculture, and there were certain adaptations that actually happen, and some people can tolerate slightly more. That's why people can tolerate slightly more, the current sad diet for longer. When you see tribal people going on it, they get very sick very fast. Australian Aborigines, and many of the tribal populations like the Maasai and the Sand people, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, or the Inuit, when they go on a standard sad diet, they really have the highest rates of diabetes, inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and all that. They can't tolerate those foods at all, these tribal populations. It's only modern people that have lived in, cities of one sort or another from antiquity to now, for the last quite a few thousand years, that have acquired some capacity to deal with this. The ApoE means that you don't take in chylomicron remnants or fat that's coming in from the diet as fast into the liver. Why? In order to avoid having both high fat and high sugar inside the liver. And those mutations happen about 200,000 years ago, the ApoE33, and then about 80-odd thousand years, the ApoE22. And they were small mutations in the interglacial periods that happen when we're eating carbohydrates in these interglacial periods, but small amounts. And so it's a very small adaptation. Doesn't mean you won't engage the Randall cycle. It doesn't mean you won't become sick, but it just gives you a slight better tolerance than somebody on an ApoE44. And also, people that are on an ApoE3 or 2 tend to also have better abilities to deal with oxidative stress in the brain, where those with 4, which is more the ancestral type that you find in tribal populations, much more prevalent, the ApoE44, those people can tolerate much less sugars and stuff like that. And it was quite clear that these people will get diabetes 3 in the brain far easier. Varus seems to ignore this sort of stuff and shows all these populations. All these populations are pastoral or, either pastoral or they are basically indigenous to certain regions. And even if they consume a small amount, they're physically active. They undereat, most of these people. They're physically active. Just because I was having a bit of a, that was like a celebration, a lot of food, a bit of wine and stuff like that. But most of these people undereat. They have traditionally. Humans have for a long time, until we get to the modern era where we overeat. And even in the West, it took us until the 20th century, the middle part of the 20th century, to be able to, the food industry, to produce very cheap food, processed food, but very cheap food. I mean, even back in the time of Nixon himself realized that many people in America were undernourished. And it's the reason, because they were undernourished, why people were quite thin, even on a mixed diet, because they weren't engaging the Randall cycle as often. They were physically quite active. And then he encouraged his agricultural secretary to go out there and actually subsidize the farmers and encourage them to produce more. And they bloody did. And the food industry said, this is a whole lot of cheap material. We can use this to turn it into a commodity. And that's what they did. what do you think the foods of civilization are? Processed foods, commodities. And that's what they last longer on the shelf, got higher shelf life. And that's what they produced in the modern era. But people, for a long period, were undernourished. And we know that when you undernourish somebody, you actually extend their life even on a mixed diet, because you're not engaging the Randall cycle as often or very little. That's the reason. Something that Varus sort of ignores because it's convenient for his own agenda, in that regard. The last thing you need in old age is to go more plant-based. My father did that in his 70s and it started to suffer sarcopenia and muscle loss. His muscles, atrophied, and he had all this hanging loose muscle tissue. And then I put him on taurine and leucine supplementation plus more protein, eating more animal foods, and he regained his muscle and his strength. So Varus has got no idea what he's talking about. And with his information, he's going to end up causing his own supporters in older age a lot of sarcopenia and osteoporosis and things like that because of his ignorance. These people covet animal foods in these sort of areas, even the people that he showed. Yes, they will consume some carbohydrates because they're trying to get as much nutrition as possible from any source. And when you've got limited foods and all that. And that old lady, she was in her 80s or whatever. She wasn't as robust. I mean, Mary Ruddock, that has dealt with the Maasai and the Hadza and all that, she was living with a Maasai for a couple of weeks. And it was a 120-odd-year-old woman that was jumping up and down in one of their dancing stuff. I don't think that old woman looked quite, not as robust, let's put it that way. So, give us a break. And she's not even excess consuming, and she's physically active and all that compared to modern day old people. And she didn't look, like top at her age. I've seen other 80-year-olds in other tribal societies looking much more robust. She looked a bit undernourished, and she looked, so people see what they like to see. That's the reality. So, I mean, need to ignore all that sort of bullshit. But also within our community, we need to ignore some of the bullshit that people have these blinker. They have these blinkers, and they have their sort of pet foods that they push. They go, you got to eat this. If you're not eating this, you're not a real carnivore. Really? My sort of reply is the finger. Exactly. That's my sort of reply and all that. What a load of nonsense. What a load of nonsense. It's all amino acids and fatty acids when it hits the stomach and actually gets denatured and broken down into simple parts. And if there's any sort of trace pieces of oxidation, what our intracellular antioxidant system can deal with that, because it's very little. And that's 3 hours of cooking something like pork for 3 hours. I don't think most carnivores, at most, they will cook pork right through for about half an hour. At most. Most will cook it even less than that. And they'll cook most of the other meats just about as long. These meats were cooked for 3 hours and there were trace amounts. Absolutely zero issue with any sort of, issues of oxidation or aldehydes or anything like that. In order to get levels above trace levels, they had to cook the meat for 32 hours. For those who haven't seen the video, for 32 hours. And even then, it was still lower than the oils. Even olive oil was higher in things, in oxidative products and aldehydes. So even if you cook and literally char the damn stuff, it's still going to have less oxidative products compared to oils. So not that I encourage people to cook their steaks for 32 hours and eat it. That'd be ridiculous, let alone it would taste really foul and dry. So, but what I'm trying to get at is a lot of these people, they look at these sort of studies which are designed with these extreme sort of manipulations to the food, and they give it to rats and all that, and they go, oh, look, well, it's going to kill you. Really? You cooked it for so many hours, and what do you expect? I mean, the rats are not even adapted. They're not even carnivores. So, what do you expect? God, they can't deal with it. Different animals have different levels of capacity to deal with oxidative stress. So, I mean, if you give them excess of anything, some animals can tolerate certain things, others not. We know that. I mean, we can tolerate, even though it's contraindicated, chocolate. You give it to certain animals, it'll make them sick really quickly, even a small amount. So you don't give dogs as an example. This is the whole thing. People need to stop using these examples. I mean, even when he talked about, Pottinger's cats. I mean, really? Really, mate? I mean, Pottinger's cats is all about taurine. Nothing else. It's all about taurine. They can produce extremely little taurine. So for them, when you cook meat, you lower the amount of taurine. Now, for humans, that's fine because we eat plenty. We've got a bigger capacity to consume more, and we're fine. We also produce some endogenously from methionine and cysteine, so we don't have as much a requirement. So if you're fairly healthy, not a problem. Obviously, if you're unhealthy, you may require slightly higher doses, but that's for therapeutic purposes. It's not basically like everybody's going to be on taurine. No, if you've got fibrosis because you're on an inappropriate diet for a number of decades and you've got a lot of tissue problems, we usually use a number of animal nutrients at high concentrations for therapeutic purposes. You get burnt. You need certain type, more protein, more cholesterol, more of those sort of foods than somebody who's, let's say somebody at 70 odd kilos is sort of having, in terms of kilocalories, 2,000. Now, obviously, we know that that's nonsense. It's a measurement of heat, but we're just using it as a rough sort of thing just to give you people an idea. Well, for somebody who's a burns victim, they would need something like 7,000. I mean, that's more than 3 times. It's like 3.5 times. So what, you're going to say, well, no, I'm not going to give them because that's not the requirement. Well, they don't have a standard requirement. They're not in a healthy state without any health problems. They've got major burns. They need that extra material to heal, or they need, that's why we use supplementation, or we use certain things, or encourage people to consume a certain amount for a certain amount of months, like I do with the B vitamins and this and that and whatever else that I recommend in my gut, sort of improvement videos. There's, on the sort of gut issues, there's a whole playlist, covers all that sort of stuff and many others of that sort. Yeah, that's where the intervention. But let's not just say everybody needs this. That's the other thing that drives me up the wall. Not everyone needs it. If you're young and healthy, you probably don't. But if you've got some underlying issues, you may need some of these things in a certain percentage. That's where you go and consult with people like Bart, stuff like that. Now, I don't do consultancies because I just don't have the time. I've got a day job. And so I do some videos and provide some general information. You can do it yourself with some of the information that I provide and experiment a bit. But that's on your own. And that's, you have to take responsibility. I take no responsibility for the information that I provide. I provide the best research and information that you can utilize, but then there may be individual requirements that may be slightly different. Some people will send me an email now and then, and I usually encourage them, just leave me a comment and I'll usually answer it quite fast. I don't really reply to emails that much anymore. It's primarily comments. And I'll just leave a long explanation and just say, yep, this sort of stuff. For certain people that have got really true health problems, and I'm not saying, oh, my ass hurts a bit or my hand hurts a bit. Really? Don't bother me. Ask me a question, I'll answer. I'll tell you what the issue may be and what you need to go and look at and stuff like that. The only times that I will do free consultancies is in rare cases when people have got really severe issues, and the videos are not enough, or the information that I've provided them is not enough, and they may need to do a one-off consultancy just to basically so I can explain a number of things to them in that regard and clear a number of things up. So I'm fine with that, and I'm selective. So, and if I find people are using me, I'll blow them off very fast. And you know, so don't come to me with the bullshit stuff, because I can pick up bullshit from a mile away. Remember, I've dealt with a number of con artists that have come into my family, and I was able to pick them up so quickly like that. So don't try and con me. You know, I don't give money out, and I don't do anything. I'll give you information, and if you don't like that, that's my reply. So I do this as a service to the community, freely, but don't, let's say, push or be too demanding, because I'll just bloody ignore you. Simple as that. I'm not your little bitch. Let's put it that way. So I'll help people out that are trying to help themselves, but people that are basically just coming around to complain or whatever, go somewhere else. I'm not interested in that regard. So that's the purpose. And I just wanted to cover some of these points, because I do get annoyed with some people in the carnivore community. Maybe that's why they don't want to interview me, because I may upset them. I don't know. But I think they're doing their own subscribers a disservice by not considering a number of these issues and being a bit more flexible in the way they deal with their subscribers and their issues. But, you know, that's my personal take on some of the controversies in the carnivore space and in the general low carb community. You know, so some people may like what I've said, some people maybe not. Personally, I don't really care. Build a bridge and get over it is what I say. At the end of the day, I'm still going to do my videos my way. I'm still going to do my content my way. I'm still going to push the carnivore message, and I will nuance it the way I believe it should be. And if some people don't like it, that's their business. They're not going to change my mind. I can be a very stubborn person, let's put it that way. But if somebody puts a credible argument up, I will think about it. I won't basically, you know, just continue supporting some pseudo thought just for the hell of it. That's neither me. I've moved away, I've reassessed certain things, and I've changed my mind, and I've corrected myself on certain things, as you guys know, especially my older subs, and I'll always do that. And I think Bart's also flexible like that, you know. I mean, you know, he had certain views on PUFA. Remember that live stream that we had? I sent him some stuff, and he was able to be convinced that, yeah, it's not a big issue at all. And he was influenced also from the paleo days, like I was, because I had the same thoughts until I started looking into it, and I go, no, it's not exactly what our paleo friends were telling us. It's a bit more nuanced. And so I realized that not exactly what they were, you know, they were running an agenda that wasn't based on research. It was a belief system. And there are, even in our community, there are people that have got belief systems rather than basing it on real concrete science and evidence and good data. You know, for us, me and Bart, our foundation stone is the N15 Delta 13 data. That's a foundation stone. That's baked in the ancestral bones of our ancestors. Nobody can dispute that. It's baked in. That is the food, animal-based food that we, you know, particular ruminants that we are completely adapted to. You know, so it's not some sort of fad diet. It's not a fad approach. It's not a reset or whatever. It's the ancestral approach. That is fundamental at the base. Then there are some nuances, you know, with the calcium and a few other things, and that is because of the last 5,500 years of some alterations to certain genetic pathways amongst a proportion of the population, anywhere from 15% to a third of the population, depending on the genetic SNPs, the single nucleotide polymorphisms, in that may affect certain population groups around the world. And those are the areas where we need to be a bit more nuanced. So that's what I try to do with a lot of my videos, to be able to help those outliers. I'm one of those people. And so I feel your pain. And so I make video with that content, because unfortunately, a lot of people don't focus on some of those elements. And so they feel like they're going on a revolving door and not getting anywhere within the carnivore community. Then they hit me and they go, okay, now I know what my problem is. And especially if they've done like a genetic test and they've picked up on some of these things, then they go, okay, that's my issue. I do that, I correct it, I'm feeling better. So yeah, and a lot of people also have been influenced by a number of people who have a fear for mTOR. They don't realize that, as long as you're eating the right sort of foods, it's going to be driving protein synthesis. And it's not going to be driving cancer or anything like that. That's just nonsense. At the end of the day, it's mitochondrial dysfunction because of high deuterium levels. We need to, sort of dilute those and actually get in the right animal nutrition to heal the body. And that's how you fix those sort of conditions over time. And a lot of people that are, people that follow me have seen success by doing that. And I know one of them, she said recently in one of my live streams that she had 0 cancer on a scan. That was really nice to hear, so it gives me a reason to come on the web and do the videos that I do, because I know I'm helping in that regard. So, anyway, that's about it. It's just to remind everyone, chill out. Don't get too wound up with all this, cooked, uncooked, this and that and whatever. It's got to be beef only or this or that. It's just, just say, yeah, whatever. And just enjoy eating animal foods, and stop overthinking and getting into these, idiotic polemics that are irrelevant, and they should be irrelevant in our community. If we can, and I think I like, Sean Baker's approach. If you can tolerate dairy, fine. The same thing, but you can tolerate is fine. People like Dr. Ken Berry, again, if you can tolerate it, fine. In that regard, I mean, and on the coffee issue, I agree with Bart. It's contraindicated. It's not an ancestral food. It's not a health food. It's got a lot of issues. But then again, I enjoy it. And I've also got genetics that can clear it out of my system very fast. The caffeine and a number of other things. I've got, some of these longevity pathways. And my ancestors have been consuming a lot of coffee for a very long time. Greeks, a lot of people in the Middle East. So it's been a long tradition. Now, people from Northern Europe have been doing less, and they're a bit more susceptible to the effects of the negative effects of coffee. And so for them, it definitely, it may be a situation where they have to, or limit it to one coffee in the midday and leave it at that. So I'm not going to tell people what to do with their lives, how to live their lives. That's their business. They're grown up, they can live this. But on the coffee issue, even there are genetic adaptations that allow others to tolerate it better. It's not ancestral, I agree. But then again, there's a lot of things that we do that are not ancestral anymore. So I'll leave it at that. And scientifically speaking, when you actually look at, or if you're looking at from an ancestral approach, that's what you have to say. It's not ancestral. It's not controversial. And but some people can tolerate it. And since they can tolerate it, it's like dairy. It's not ancestral necessarily. But some people have adapted in the last 5,500 years. And now some have even got genetics that require more of it. Why? because of the calcium issue. They can't absorb as much from just meat alone. So there are those sort of issues as well that these people completely ignore because they've got an agenda. Simple as that. Anyway, that's it. See yous.